Noradrenalin is made from the amino acid tyrosine, and it goes on to make L-dopa, which is not a neurotransmitter, but again goes on to dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter in its own right, and to noradrenalin, okay, which is a transmitter. So when we come to test with the neurotransmitter box, what I've done is I've made them up in exactly the same way that we made the hormones. We put the biologically active neurotransmitters and the intermediates there. So if you were just testing this pathway, you would test a person for noradrenaline. If they strengthen to noradrenaline, it means they've got a deficiency, and that means they've got a block here, here, or here. And then you simply fill in the nutrient and the toxin to find out which one it is. Now we know the first pathway of tyrosine to L-dopa depends upon folic acid and a particular type of folic acid called tetrahydrobiopterin. It's an oxidation pathway, so it will need B12 for the oxygen or iron there. The conversion of L-dopa to dopamine is a decarboxylase, in other words, we remove a carbon dioxide, and that is always B6 dependent and needs zinc and magnesium. Occasionally the body can use thiamine there instead, but it's usually B6, P5P, pyridoxal. And the conversion of dopamine to noradrenaline is a copper and vitamin C dependent enzyme. Okay, and again needs oxygen in there, so think iron and B12. So the key ingredients here is going to be more often than not it's B6 that the person needs, magnesium and zinc. This is the most common area where we have the deficiency. We then break noradrenaline down or metabolize it by monoamine oxidase to the oxidized form of noradrenaline, and then we methylate it with S-adenosylmethionine to the methoxylated. So these intermediate substances again are in the neurotransmitter kit. So if a person weakens to noradrenaline, it means they've got too much and they're not able to break it down. And if they can't break it down, it must be because there's a block here, here, or here. Okay? So the technical details there, monoamine oxidase is an enzyme which breaks down noradrenaline, and it also breaks down dopamine, histamine, and serotonin. Okay? So it has many functions, and it's a copper-dependent enzyme and a vitamin B2, NFAD-dependent enzyme. Okay? Monoamine oxidase. So it's an oxidizing enzyme. So with all oxidative reactions, potentially you can produce oxygen derivatives or free radicals. Okay, so when this is using a lot, there is a certain amount, maybe 5%, will be reactive oxygen species. Now, monoamine oxidase will metabolize a number of these, as I said, and there's another substance which we're going to come to in a minute called tyramine. And tyramine is an oxidized derivative of tyrosine and is also broken down by monoamine oxidase. So we'll be looking at that in a minute. Now, the conjugation of the methoxylated derivatives then is done by glutathione, by sulfur, by glucuronidation, glucuronic acid, and acetylation. So the final metabolism of all these neurotransmitters, like the hormones, depends upon conjugating them or locking them up with these compounds and then excreting them through the bile and the urine. So neurotransmitters are things we've got to get rid of, and we metabolize them, and then we pass them out. Right, so noradrenaline works basically the sympathetic nervous system. There's parts of the brainstem, parts of the pontine and the midbrain area, which are very important from noradrenaline. There's a number of different receptors. There's the alpha 1, alpha 2 receptors, and the beta 1 and beta 2. We've all heard of alpha blockers and beta blockers, which block these specific ones. You can read those. Noradrenaline enhances alertness. This is why when we get a good shock and we switch on our sympathetics, we become wide awake, which is good. It's involved with a certain amount of arousal and good mood. So noradrenaline is a good thing, but too much noradrenaline can make us oversympathetic and alert. It's secreted by many neurons, as we know, and helps to regulate the overall activity and mood of the mind. So it is both stimulatory and to a certain extent it has some inhibitory pathways. And it helps us to focus attention, which is why when we're under stress we can concentrate in. So a bit of exam nerves is good. Okay? A bit of stage fright is good. Okay? Most people perform better on stage if they're frightened. I used to treat an opera singer, professional opera singer, when she was in this country, and she said, my bowels are just awful, she said, for the whole morning before the performance. She said, it's just diabolical. And I said, well, what happens when you're on stage? She said, I'm absolutely fine, absolutely fine. But when she goes on stage, the terror is there with thousands of people, and then she's fine, then she can sing beautifully. Okay, so sources of noradrenaline: bananas, oranges, plums. Well, we won't worry about those too much. Okay, symptoms of deficiency of noradrenaline is really a lack of get up and go. This is the person who's got apathy and despair, the sloth or sloth type of person. You see the teenager around here, who can't get out of bed, doesn't know what to do. And you say, oh, how are you? Oh, I'm bored. This is the word that always comes out, is I'm bored. This is apathy and despair, lack of get up and go. They have decreased superoxide production, so they get free radical buildup. They have memory impairment because it's involved there, dementia, delusions, delirium, hypotension because they've got lack of, short-sighted, this is the myopic person because they're not dilating their pupil there. Bronchial constriction because it's lack of noradrenaline, because the thing you give is noradrenaline, isn't it, to somebody who's got asthma. And small intestine problems, of course, because it's small intestine meridian. If you've got too much noradrenaline, you're anxious, tremor, high superoxide, aggressive behavior, impulsive behavior, irritability. Nothing is right for these people. You know somebody like that? Okay, yeah, we've all got people in the family, or nothing is ever right. Okay, that's noradrenaline. Hypertension, of course, constipation because you want to shut your bowels down, underweight, palpitations and tachycardia, and heart arrhythmias. So these are all people who would show positive on the heart meridian for high noradrenaline. So high noradrenaline is heart meridian. Remember, the heart meridian is right up underneath the axilla there. Okay, go right to the top of the axilla, and you're on the posterior wall of the pectoral muscles when you touch heart 1. Small intestine is literally just in front of the tragus of the ear, right on the posterior part of the temporomandibular joint for deficiencies. Okay, now tyramine. Tyramine is an oxidized derivative of tyrosine. It is present in anything which is aged. Okay, if it's got tyrosine in it and it's aged and it's become oxidized, well, then tyramine is formed. And traditionally, it's going to be bananas and avocados when they go brown. Okay, that brown is the oxidation of it, and that is a rich source of tyramine. Cheese, particularly here, aged cheese. Okay. Particularly the older the cheese, the more mature the cheese, the bluer the cheese, etc., the higher the tyramine content. Sour cream, chocolate, anything that's pickled, salamis, pickled herrings, etc. Well, these are sources of tyramine. Okay, oranges. Now, anybody know sort of a common link? Oranges, chocolate, cheese. You begin to build up a pattern of what this person suffers from. Have migraine headaches, okay? Now, why do they suffer from migraine headaches? Why does this stuff? Simply because this stuff is so toxic, it has top priority in the body for using monoamine oxidase enzyme because it's very neurotoxic. So the body uses up its monoamine oxidase that it produces to metabolize tyramine. So if it has to metabolize tyramine, it can't metabolize the other transmitters. And the main one, apart from noradrenaline and dopamine that it metabolizes, is serotonin. Okay, now serotonin is a vasoconstrictor in the body, but it's a vasodilator in the mid-meningeal artery in the brain. So what happens if you can't metabolize serotonin is you get dilation of the mid-meningeal artery, and that's what happens with the migraine. Okay? So from a neuropeptide point of view, what happens with the migraine is they're always high serotonin. And that equates, of course, with the kidney meridian. Okay? But tyramine-sensitive people, in other words, people who can't break tyramine down very easily, are always the blue people. Very important key thing, if you get headaches and you're red or green or a combination of those, they're not true migraines. You have to be a blue person to get a migraine, but it doesn't mean that every blue person gets migraines, okay? But you'll always find a true migraine will weaken to tyramine and blue, okay? Because blue people don't have the cytochrome P450s to metabolize tyramine, and particularly the monoamine oxidase, okay? So in other words, they need to reduce these foods, and often the one thing that does it more than anything else is cheese. Just give up cheese. You know, they are sensitive to aged cheese. If you've got a migraine, just don't eat cheese. Cut down on any banana or avocado that is off. As long as they're not off, you're all right. Watch the oranges in the diet, and maybe, chocolate as well. what they call the 4 C's there. So very often migraines will improve, or if not dramatically improve and negate, by just cutting out the tyramine foods. Okay? But you don't usually find a green or a red person gets migraines. Okay? If they get migraines, you know that they're a blue person. Okay? They just have not got the cytochrome P450 enzymes to be able to metabolize tyramine. So anything that's fermented, watch. And of course the worst things here are beers and wines. You know, they just drive tyramine people mad. Okay, very, very difficult, beers and wines. Fermented soya products, that would be your soy sauce and your miso and things. Again, very difficult with these people. But generally, soya products are excellent for blue people because they're more associated with vegetarian diets and not very good on cow's milk. So tyramine is inactivated by monoamine oxidase. We know these foods are the ones because they're not permitted to ingest with monoamine oxidase inhibiting drugs like Marplan and Nardo and Parnate. They give warning leaflets in there, do not eat the following foods if you're on this medication because they inhibit monoamine oxidase. Sleep disturbances, just useful to say, difficulty in going to sleep, check for high noradrenalin and tyramine. Okay? If you've got difficulty going to sleep, your mind is buzzing, it's because you've got too much noradrenalin and tyramine. That's why you don't eat cheese in the evening if you have sleep problems. Okay? Nightmares, check for high dopamine. High dopamine really hits the amygdala and gives you all sorts of bad attacks, and tyramine. Again, never eat cheese, chocolate and so on in the evening. Awake in the middle of the night, work out the time that the person wakes up in the night. Is it between 2 and 4? Is it between 4 and 6 and so on? That'll tell you. If it's liver time, it's 2 to 4 at the moment. Check for high acetylcholine, and it's always a toxin coming through the liver, usually something you've eaten. General sleep disturbances may be due to low serotonin, which goes on to make melatonin. So if you've got low serotonin, you'll go on to low melatonin. So check for the nutrients that convert serotonin to melatonin, which is on the hormone chart, which you had last time, and that's mainly magnesium. So magnesium is the one thing I would suggest more than anything else for people who have sleep disturbances. Now dopamine, very easy because we've already done dopamine in its production. Same thing as making noradrenalin, except we convert tyrosine to L-dopa with tetrahydrobiopterin, L-dopa to dopamine, which needs the B6 and the zinc and the magnesium. We then break dopamine down again with monoamine oxidase to the oxidized form, methylate it, and then conjugate it. And there's the factors that do this. And then we finally conjugate it with sulfur, glutathione, glucuronidation, and acetylation. So dopamine circuits, of course, we all know are going to be in the various areas of the brain, but particularly in the amygdala, which is like the rheostat for the limbic system, for the fears and anxieties that we have, and obviously in the neostratum there. The one area which is not really known very much about is the smell. The olfactory tuberculum olfactorium is smell. You know those people who are deficient in smell, okay? And that is always a sign of zinc deficiency clinically, but what it is actually a lack of dopamine. And it is the first sign of Parkinson's disease. Okay, remember that. The first sign of Parkinson's disease is actually a lack of smell. So start to move that on to getting the zinc level up. If you can restore the sense of smell, you may inhibit the fact of the onset of the Parkinson's. Parkinson's is always blue people. Okay, either directly blue or half blue. But these are people who weaken to the blue acetate in some part or other. Okay, so that's Parkinson's disease. Okay, so we've got the extrapyramidal system there, the striatum, the nigra striatum, sorry, the marker doesn't come up here very well. Substantia nigra here is, of course, the extrapyramidal system, which is classically the on-off of the Parkinson's person. So the amygdala there is active in fears and negative emotions. Dopamine is in some sympathetic systems, some exocrine glands, the gastrointestinal tract, the gut and the renal parts, the carotid body. Hypoxia decreases dopamine released in the carotid body and reflexly stimulates respiration. So hypoxia, a very important part of this, will inhibit dopamine. Okay, so we've got large areas of the midbrain, as we know there, the smell, and the retina is associated with photophobia, low dopamine, and illumination. Dopamine receptors, again, are now known to be all over the body. We talk about substantia nigra in relationship to Parkinson's disease. Dopaminergic neurons involved in the action of most antipsychotic drugs, which antagonize the effects of dopamine. In other words, too much dopamine can cause psychotic effects, run from the brain stem to the limbic, while the dopamine released from the hypothalamic cells travels via private blood supply. The system to the anti-opioid, where it tonically suppresses the release of prolactin. Drugs that interfere with the release or actions of this dopamine, in order to reduce dopamine in psychosis, can cause lactation as a side effect, even in men. Okay. Oh. Okay, so better not to get psychosis and be put on these drugs. Okay, so it enhances sex drive. That's what I said, it's the winning factor, which is why when England won it, everybody's sex drive went up. Our mood was good, okay, our alertness was good, and our movement was good. Okay? So wait for the next match. It's a pity the European Cup only comes every 4 years, and we only occasionally win a match. But we are lucky. We've got the Olympics coming up as well, so we do stand a chance of getting some there. L-Dopa is contained in avocados, bananas, all the ones that we talked about being bad, but they're bad when they're off, remember. But when they're not off, it's fine. And beans, especially broad beans. Natural sources of dopamine, hawthorn, bananas, poppy seeds, avocados. Whether you can use the dopamine in there is debatable, because you would normally chop dopamine down by digestion, but at least you've got the raw components of it. And there are been a lot of interest in broad bean extracts for treating Parkinson's disease. And it may be that, like L-Dopa, it helps for a while, but really, again, it's not the fundamental cause. Dopamine facilitates critical brain functions. It's associated with feelings of pleasure and pain, and helps to mediate the reinforcement of natural rewards such as food, water, and sex. It is associated with emotional responses and subconscious skeletal movement. It's used to communicate between the hypothalamus and the pituitary, and probably most important here is the communication between the left and the right cortex. It's the neurotransmitter at the corpus callosum. Okay? The corpus callosum is not one neuron connecting left and right brain. It is a series of synapses, up to 10 different nerves across the corpus callosum to slow the left and right brain functions down. And they're all dopaminergic. So the one thing you get when people have dopamine problems is difficulty switching left to right brain. They're not communicating. So we said earlier, when England wins, we'll get a surge of dopamine, and when Sweden loses, they get an inhibition of serotonin. Okay, so that's the classic sort of feeling the blues. One thing that really decreases down the dopamine more than anything else is cannabis, but I don't have to teach you that. Okay. Cannabis is the biggest cause of mental illness. Strange, isn't it, that nobody's really doing anything about it? They're not really putting the clamps on cannabis that much, and yet the mental hospitals are full of people who are on drug problems. And yet drugs are the biggest cause of crime in this country. Is it the same in Germany? It's the biggest cause of burglaries in houses and things. 9/10 of burglaries are committed by drug addicts who need the money fast, sell out the commodity for next to nothing on eBay or whatever, and just to buy drugs. If they could eradicate the drug problem, most of the crime would decrease. So grief and regret. Loss of dopamine leads to grief and regret, difficulty in giving things up and holding on to the past. Decreased Th2 production, so down goes the immunity. Indecision, because you can't do left and right brain function properly. Poor concentration, irrational behavior, a world without pleasure. Now, can you imagine that? But that is what most of our people live by, isn't it? Is a world without and they, you can just see that glum expression on clumsiness because of the extrapyramidal system not working right, photophobia, dendritic inhibition, so they're not regenerating their dendrites, depression, and particularly this is the manic depression. Okay, that's loss of smell. We said tremor, rigidity. Too much is the addict. Too much dopamine is the one who wants that sex all the time, wants England to win. The football fan, you know, they're addicted to football or whatever it might be. It could be shopping, could be money, could be whatever. So the addict is craving and desire. You know, they're never satisfied. Everything has to be, you know, more and more and more of it. These have high Th2 production, anxiety, aggression, confusion, nightmares. And this is because of the amygdala, the stimulation of the amygdala when they're asleep. Psychoses, eventually, that you're looking around who's behind you, and schizophrenia because you divided the left and the right hemispheres. Okay, so a few famous people. We know who that is. Who's that? Used to be with Spike Milligan. Who's that? Florence, I'll give you a name, Nightingale. Who's that with the one ear? Okay, who's that? Is that Tennyson, isn't it? Or Byron? Byron. And who's that? Edgar Allan Poe. Okay, what's the common theme to all these? Manic depression. Okay, good, well done. Full marks there. Okay, right. One more. Okay, good test. Who's that one? Einstein. That one? Socrates. That one? Isaac Newton. That one? Yeah, you must know that one, surely. 1812, shall I give you a clue? Tchaikovsky, yeah. That one? What? It's a poet, yeah. And that one? Not doing so well here. Only 4 here. Okay, but you won't forget them now. Okay, so Burns and Tennyson. Okay, notice most poets are manic depressives. Okay, what you might not know is most poets were drug addicts, weren't they? That's why they came up with these beautiful compositions, actually fantastic, when they're on a high. But when they're on a low, they're real depressives. Okay, and of course one of the major ones was Charles Dickens, again very famous, insomnia, depression, but tremendous creativity, of course, when he was writing. And when he wasn't writing, he was in trouble. So diagnostic points, dopamine high and low. Dopamine low is the conception vessel. I know this goes against the grain that most people say this is a yin meridian, but from a neurological point of view, it works as a yang, as a deficiency, and the governor vessel at 27 acts as the excess. Okay, so your Parkinson's would classically be conception vessel, and your psychotic schizophrenic would be on the top. Doesn't mean that everybody weakens there is a schizophrenic. Okay, they may not be that high yet. I seem to remember, Paul, there was a seminar a little while ago when we found you were there, and both of them said, yes, you're right. Okay, so serotonin. We said serotonin is the gin of the neurotransmitters. That means it's a mood elevator, but too much mood elevation can throw you into very similar symptoms. It's particularly present in areas of the brain involved with pain and how to block pain. It's made, the substrate is tryptophan. Tryptophan is the amino acid as opposed to tyrosine. The intermediate substance is 5-hydroxytryptophan, or 5-HT, which is often sold as an elevator of mood. And this then goes on, again, decarboxylation, and all decarboxylation enzymes are B6 dependent, pyridoxal 5-phosphate, and require zinc and magnesium. So you can see how zinc and magnesium, B6, keep coming round and round, and especially, again, B1 for the oxygen. So hands up those people, before we go and forget, didn't taste zinc or had just a mild flavour of zinc. So be totally honest. So it's hands up those who did taste it. Yeah, so it's about 50-50. So it's not too bad today. Often it's as high as 2/3. But when again you see where zinc comes from, you know, really the only good sources of zinc these days are probably from the sea, from sea extracts, from fish, from seaweed and so on. Again, because of intensive farming, the level in this soil, it goes down. So even though they tell you zinc comes from eggs and so on, the best source remains the sea. And of course, top of the sea is oysters. Okay, so seafood, seaweed is probably better than fish even. So this makes serotonin, and the serotonin is broken down in the same way that noradrenalin and dopamine. It's monoamine oxidase, first of all, and then methylated by S-adenosylmethionine, and then conjugated. So all these are very similar, needs monoamine oxidase. So here we may consider remember the migraine patient is the one who has the high level of serotonin, and very often it's the monoamine oxidase which is being occupied by the tyramine foods. Okay? So these people may respond to some B2, some copper and things, but really they've got to reduce the foods that contain the tyramine. So same conjugations, glutathione, sulfur, glucuronidation, acetylation, same foods. Serotonin is a transmitter in the midline raphe nucleus of the rostral pons. This is the one to do with pain. Basal ganglions, controlling fine movement. Hypothalamus, thalamus, hippocampus for the memory, limbic system, all sorts of areas in there. Brains of women produce only about 2/3 as much of serotonin as those of men, which is thought to be why women suffer from depression much more than men, especially French women. Okay? Okay. French men have the lowest life expectancy in the EU, okay? And the main killer for French men is prostate cancer, okay? They're all, generally, French men often are small, okay? Often balding head, and that's classical blues, isn't it? They're blue people, and blue people have a greater tendency towards cancers, and you can see that in the little Frenchman, tubby here, and the bald head, he's on the way, you know, on there. So help protection with the right oils, etc., and the right nutrients, you know, may do wonders on there. So life expectancy is smallest for a male, but longest for a female. But French prescribe more antidepressants than any other nation in the EU. So the question is, why are so many women depressed? Possibly because their men are gone. But it's probably more likely to do with the diet, that they're lacking in serotonin and other brain chemicals. So it has been shown that they produce only 2/3 of it. This may explain the greater vulnerability. Within the pineal gland, we know serotonin goes on to make melatonin, which induces our sleep. Serotoninergic neurons are found in practically everyone, affecting mood, sleep, food intake. So low levels of serotonin are thought to be involved with people who have binges and bulimia and anorexia. So often with anorexics, there's low serotonin, but for sure you tend to find alcoholics. Although alcohol is an addiction, alcoholism is really depression. There's no question about that. They're elevating their serotonin and things because what they're trying to do is to relieve the underlying depression. So it's the depression which is the major cause, and of course that's at the background of the anorexia. So blockage of the reuptake. So here we see a good example of serotonin being recycled back, being produced here, and then going around and being recycled up in the terminal end of the neuron, and that's where we block it with the drugs like Prozac. So it increases the level of serotonin in the synapse, which is a good thing in the short-term wise for somebody who's in a desperate state. But long-term wise, we want them to be able to produce their own serotonin. And the problem is that the indication of loss of receptors. So if you don't make your own serotonin and you rely upon it being there by the chemicals, it may predispose the person to acute depressive crises, particularly when they come off the Prozac, and that can lead to suicide. Okay, because they're really, really low because they haven't produced any of themselves. So it's a very dangerous drug. It's very addictive. People they'll tell you that, but once you've been on it for a few months, your own production of serotonin decreases because you're keeping it high. And when you then come off the Prozac, then you go right down. Migraines we talked about already. So we know there. I'll tell you. So activities. Understanding numerous neurotransmitters and their balance helps us understand moods from a biochemical point of view. Any activity in the garden, such as weeding, pruning, cultivating, and harvesting, has been shown to increase the levels of serotonin. Very interesting. Gardening keeps calm minds and things. Very good, really. And there's lots of activities, of course, that will do this. Walk in the woods, anything that communicates with nature. But gardening specifically is being shown to elevate serotonin. So low serotonin, emotions, unconscious emotions, is shame and humiliation. This is the person who feels the pits, otherwise known as the blues. Low B cells, so they've got low antibodies. It could be suicidal tendencies, sleep disorders, compulsive disorders. Now, you know, with compulsive disorder, somebody who has to have things done in this way, you know, they get obsessions about something. And we've all got obsessions about something, but some people have obsessions all the time, don't they? And they can be very difficult people to live with. And that's usually the bladder meridian. Anorexia, of course, bulimia, weight gain, decreased libido, impulsive aggression, alcoholism, sexual deviance. Okay, so deviant sexuals will probably be low in serotonin. They're probably depressed. And I think that's probably right if you think about sexual deviant, like a paedophile is somebody who's got problems there, low body temperature, and of course they often have bladder problems. Remember, the main irritant to the bladder is often the body passing out toxic metals. So if a person shows to kidney or bladder, think toxic metals for that. Okay? So high levels of anxiety, high levels of serotonin reflect as anxiety and fear, increased B cell production, which means we've got an overactive immune system, which creates allergies. Okay, so overactive immune system is what we get in allergy. Migraines, as we said, because of the lack of monoamine oxidase to break serotonin. Depression, too much of it pushes us over the top, like too much gin. You ever try being in that experience when you've had too much gin? You know, you go down and then you burst into tears, and then you say things that you wish you hadn't said the following day, and not a good drink. Two gins is enough. You get depression. Pains, anorexia, masked aggression, again obsessive, shyness, lack of self-confidence, low sex drive. Very similar, isn't it? Too much to too low. Hypertension, because you've got high body temperature. Kidney problems, and again, think toxic metals. Every time you've got kidney or bladder, think toxic metals. What do the kidneys and the bladder do? They pass out water-soluble toxins. So there's always a need for more water with both of these. Flush the system through. More good quality water. Okay? So 2 points, bladder, which is right in the corner of the eye orbit there, and kidney, which is on kidney 27, just below the clavicle and the first rib space. Okay, here we